don't know why I'm backlit today when I'm usually not. It's weird. I guess I'm over more usually. Whatever. I have preserved no more of Johnson's conversation at the times when I saw him during the rest of this month, till Sunday the 30th of May, when I met him in the evening at Mr. Hoole's, where there was a large company both of ladies and gentlemen. Sir James Johnston happened to say that he paid no regard to the arguments of counsel at the bar of the House of Commons, because they were paid for speaking. Johnson said, "Nay, sir, argument is argument. You cannot help paying regard to their arguments if they are good. If it were testimony, you might disregard it, if you knew that it was purchased." If you knew that it were purchased, it says here, but I corrected the grammar. I corrected Johnson's grammar, the guy who invented the dictionary, basically. I'm going to correct his grammar. There is a beautiful image in Bacon upon this subject. Testimony is like an arrow shot from a long bow. The force of it depends on the strength of the hand that draws it. Argument is like an arrow from a crossbow, which has equal force, though shot by a child. That's a good one. He had dined that day at Mr. Hoole's, and Miss Helen Maria Williams being expected in the evening. Mr. Hoole put into his hands her beautiful Ode on the Peace, the piece made by the very able statesman, the Earl of Shelburne, now Marquis of Lansdowne, which it may fairly be considered as the foundation of all the prosperity of Great Britain since that time. Johnson read it over, and when this elegant and accomplished young lady was presented to him, he took her by the hand in the most courteous manner and repeated the finest stanza of her poem. This was the most delicate and pleasing compliment he could pay. Her respectable friend, Dr. Kippis, from whom I had this anecdote, was standing by and was not a little gratified. Footnote here about this accomplished young lady. In the first edition of my work, the epitaph amiable was given, I guess, instead of accomplished. I was sorry to be obliged to strike it out, but I could not in justice suffer it to remain after this young lady had not only written in favor of the savage anarchy with which France has been visited, but had, as I have been informed by good authority, walked without horror over the ground at the Tuileries when it was strewed with the naked bodies of the faithful Swiss guards who were barbarously massacred for having bravely defended against a crew of ruffians the monarch whom they have taken an oath to defend. From Dr. Johnson she could now expect not endearment, but repulsion. So she was kind of the Jane Fonda of her time, I guess. Miss Williams told me that the only other time she was fortunate enough to be in Dr. Johnson's company, he asked her to sit down by him, which he did, and upon her inquiring how he was, he answered, "I am very well indeed, madame. I am very ill, even when you are near me. What should I be were you at a distance?" He had now a great desire to go to Oxford at his first jaunt, after his illness. We talked of it for some days, and I had promised to accompany him. He was impatient and fretful tonight, because I did not at once agree to go with him on Thursday. When I considered how ill he had been, and what allowance should be made for the influence of sickness upon his temper, I resolved to indulge him, though with some inconvenience to myself, as I wished to attend the musical meeting in honor of Handel in Westminster Abbey on the following Saturday. In the midst of his own diseases and pains, Johnson was ever compassionate to the distresses of others, and actively earnest in procuring them aid, as appears from a note to Sir Joshua Reynolds of June 1st in these words, quote, I am ashamed to ask for some relief for a poor man to whom I hope I have given what I can be expected to spare. The man importunes to me, and the blow goes round. I am going to try another air on Thursday. On Thursday, June 3rd, the Oxford Post coach took us up in the morning at Bolt Court. The other two passengers were Mrs. Beresford and her daughter, two very agreeable ladies from America. They were going to Worcestershire, where they then resided. Frank had been sent by his master the day before to take places for us, and I found from the waybill that Dr. Johnson had made our names to be put down. Mrs. Beresford, who had read it, whispered me, "Is this the great Dr. Johnson?" I told her it was, so she was then prepared to listen. As she soon happened to mention in a voice so low that Johnson did not hear it, that her husband had been a member of the American Congress, I cautioned her to beware of introducing that subject, as she must know how very violent Johnson was against the people of that country. He talked a great deal, but I am sorry I have preserved little of the conversation. Miss Beresford was so much charmed that she said to me aside, "How he does talk! Every sentence is an essay." She amused himself in the coach with nodding. He would scarcely allow this species of employment any merit. "Next to mere idleness," said Johnson, "I think nodding is to be reckoned in the scale of insignificance, though I once attempted to learn nodding. Dempster's sister," looking to me, "endeavored to teach me it, but I made no progress." I was surprised at his talking without reserve in the public post-coach of the state of his affairs. He said, "I have," said Johnson, "about the world I think about £1,000, which I intend shall afford Frank an annuity of £70 a year." Indeed, his openness with people at a first interview was remarkable. He said once to Mr. Langton, "I think I am like Squire Richard in the journey to London. I am never strange in a stranger's place." He was truly social. He strongly censored what is much too common in England among persons of condition, maintaining an absolute silence when unknown to each other, as for instance when occasionally brought together in a room before the master or mistress of the house has appeared. "Sir, that is being so uncivilized as not to understand the common rights of humanity," said Johnson. At the inn where we stopped, he was exceedingly dissatisfied with some roast mutton which we had for dinner. The ladies I saw wondered to see the great philosopher, whose wisdom and wit they had been admiring all the way, get into ill humor from such a cause. He scolded the waiter, saying, "It is as bad can be. It is ill-fed, ill-killed, ill-kept, and ill-dressed." He bore the journey very well, and seemed to feel himself elevated as he approached Oxford, that magnificent and venerable seat of learning, orthodoxy, and Toryism. Frank came in the heavy coach in readiness to attend him, and we were received with the most polite hospitality at the house of his old friend Dr. Adams, master of Pembroke College, who had given us a kind invitation. Before we were set down, I communicated to Johnson my having engaged to return to London directly, for the reason I have mentioned, but that I would hasten back to him again. He was pleased that I had made this journey merely to keep him company. He was easy and placid with Dr. Adams, Mrs. and Miss Adams, and Mrs. Kennicott, widow of the learned Hebraeum, who was here on a visit. He soon dispatched the inquiries which were made about his illness and recovery by a short and distinct narrative, and then, assuming a gay air, repeated from Swift, "Nor think on our approaching ills, and talk of spectacles and pills." Dr. Newton, the Bishop of Bristol, having been mentioned, Johnson, recollecting the manner in which he had been censured by the prelate, thus retaliated, "Tom knew he should be dead before what he has said of me would appear." He durst not have printed it while he was alive. Dr. Adams said, I believe his dissertations on the prophecies is his great work. And Johnson said, Why, sir, it is Tom's great work. But how far it is great, or how much of it is Tom's, are other questions. I fancy a considerable part of it was borrowed. Dr. Adams said, He was a very successful man. Johnson said, I don't think so, sir. He did not get very high. He was late in getting what he did get, and he did not get it by the best means. I believe he was a gross flatterer. There's a footnote about Dr. Newton. Dr. Newton, I guess, is this Isaac Newton? I just put that together. This must be Isaac Newton. I'm assuming, maybe not. Don't assume. I'm not going to assume. But I'm thinking it is. Dr. Newton, in his account of his own life, after amniverting upon Mr. Gibbon's history, says, Dr. Johnson's Lives of the Poets afforded more amusement, but Candor was much hurt and offended at the malevolence that predominates in every part. Some passages, it must be allowed, are judicious and well written, but make not sufficient compensation for so much spleen and ill humor. Never was any biographer more sparing of his praise or more abundant in his censures. He seemingly delights more in exposing blemishes than in recommending beauties, slightly passes over excellences, enlarges upon imperfections, and not content with his own severe reflections, revives old scandal and produces large quotations from the forgotten works of former critics. His reputation was so high in the Republic of Letters that it wanted not to be raised upon the ruins of others. But these essays, instead of raising a higher idea than was before entertained of his understanding, have certainly given the world a worse opinion of his temper. The bishop was therefore the more surprised and concerned for his township, for he respected him not only for his genius in learning, but valued him much more for the more amiable part of his character, his humanity and charity, his morality and religion. The last sentence we may consider as the general and permanent opinion of Bishop Newton. The remark which precede it must, by all who have read Johnson's admirable work, be imputed to the disgust and peevishness of old age. I wish they had not appeared, and that Dr. Johnson had not been provoked by them to express himself not in respectable terms of a prelate whose labors were certainly of considerable advantage both in literature and religion. All right. So I guess this is Tom Newton, I'm guessing. The Bishop of Bristol. So a different Newton. Good to know. But so Newton was earlier than this, I'm guessing. Isaac Newton. What do you think? I don't know. I'm no historian, obviously. I fulfilled my intention by going to London, and I returned to Oxford on Wednesday, the 9th of June, when I was happy to find myself again in the same agreeable circle at Pembroke College, with the comfortable prospect of making some stay. Johnson welcomed my return with more than ordinary glee. He talked with great regard of the Honorable Archibald Campbell, whose character he had given at the Duke of Argyll's table when we were at Inverary. See Journal of the Tour of the Hebrides, 3rd edition, page 371, October 25th. And at this time wrote out for me in his own hand a fuller account of that learned and venerable writer, which I have published in its proper place. Johnson made a remark this evening which struck me as a good deal. I never, said he, knew a nonjuror who could reason. Surely he did not mean to deny that faculty to many of their writers, to Hicks, Brett, and other eminent divines of that persuasion, and did not recollect that the 7 bishops, so justly celebrated for their magnanimous resistance of arbitrary power, were yet nonjurors to the new government. The nonjuring clergy of Scotland, indeed, who, excepting a few, have lately, by a sudden stroke, cut off all ties of allegiance to the House of Stuart, and resolved to pray for our present lawful sovereign by name, may be thought to have confirmed this remark, as it may be said that the divine indefeasible hereditary right which they professed to believe, if ever true, must be equally true still. Many of my readers will be surprised when I mention that Johnson assured me that he had never in his life been in a non-juring meeting house. Footnote here about, where was it? His remark, I never knew a non-juror who could reason. The Reverend Mr. Agater has favored me with a note of a dialogue between Mr. John Henderson and Dr. Johnson on this topic, as related by Mr. Henderson, and it is evidently so authentic that I shall here insert it. Henderson said, "What do you think, sir, of William Law?" Johnson answered, "William Law, sir, wrote the best piece of parenetic divinity, but William Law was no reasoner." Henderson said, "Jeremy Collier, sir?" Johnson said, "Jeremy Collier fought without a rival, and therefore could not claim the victory." Mr. Henderson mentioned Canon Kettlewell, but some objections were made. At last he said, "But, sir, what do you think of Leslie?" And Johnson said, "Charles Leslie I had forgotten. Leslie was a reasoner, and a reasoner who was not to be reasoned against." All right, that's a little too much inside baseball for me, that section. Next morning at breakfast, Johnson pointed out a passage in Savage's Wanderer, saying, "These are fine verses. If," said he, "I had written with hostility of Warburton in my Shakespeare, I should have quoted this couplet. Here learning, blinded first, and then beguiled, looks dark as ignorance, as fancy wild." You see, they have fitted him to a T, smiling. Dr. Adams said, "But he did not write against Warburton." And Johnson said, "No, sir, I treated him with great respect, both in my preface and in my notes." Mrs. Kennicott spoke of her brother, the Reverend Mr. Chamberlain, who had given up great prospect in the Church of England on his conversion to the Roman Catholic faith. Johnson, who warmly admired every man who acted from a conscientious regard to principle, erroneously or not, exclaimed fervently, "God bless him." Mrs. Kennicott, in confirmation of Dr. Johnson's opinion that the present was not worse than former ages, mentioned that her brother assured her there were now less infidelity on the continent than there had been. Voltaire and Rousseau were less read. I asserted from great authority that Hume's infidelity was certainly less read. Johnson said, "All infidel writers drop into oblivion when personal connections and the fluidness of novelty are gone, though now and then a foolish fellow who thinks he can be witty upon them may bring them again into notice. There will sometimes stand up a college joker who does not consider that what is a joke in college will not do in the world." To such defenders of religion I would apply a stanza of a poem which I remember to have seen in some old collection. Henceforth be quiet and agree, each kiss his empty brother. Religion scorns a foe like thee, but dreads a friend like the other. The point is well, though the expression is not correct. One and not thee should be opposed to the other. I have inserted the stanza as Johnson repeated it from memory, but I have since found the poem itself in the Foundling Hospital for Wit, printed at London 1749. It is as follows. Epigram occasioned by religious dispute at Bath. O reason, faith, and mystery high, two wits harangue the table. Blank B blank Y believes he knows not why. N blank swears 'tis all a fable. Peace, coxcombs, peace, and both agree. N blank kiss thy empty brother. Religion laughs at foes like thee, and dreads a friend like the other. Okay. Oh, I'm all done for the day. Till next time, bye from Boswell. Cheers.